So being queer myself, as well as being part of the wider LGBT community, I've naturally had lots of opportunity to think about this. Just given how many friends, acquaintances I have, and just people who I either know in general or just know of who, again, are also queer, are also part of this community. Many of which are trans, some of which are non-binary, many of which have radically different perspectives and ideas on this subject in terms of gender. Although, for as long as I have been in this community, both in the literal sense for as long as I've self-identified as queer, and just in terms of talking to people, having again kind of friends, acquaintances, or even consuming media, just watching YouTube videos about this kind of subject, I've always found the commonly and seemingly unquestioned idea that gender is a social construct to be absolutely ridiculous. And again, for as long as I've came into contact with this, not only have I never accepted it or even considered it, I've never not found the idea, again, completely nonsensical. From the simple fact that, I mean, scientifically, verifiably, it is simply false. Men and women, and this includes trans people, simply do have different brain structures on a physiological level. Again, there's been studies on people and the gender that they identify as, in terms of if they're a trans man, but they're of course assigned female at birth. The vast majority of the time when they do go for a brain scan, they find that either they have a male brain or they have a brain that is significantly more masculine and portrays significantly more masculine characteristics than you would expect from someone who has a female body, who was assigned female at birth. And again, these differences between the male brain and the female brain will of course not completely different, will of course share many similarities in the general structure. There is simply clear differences. There is characteristics in the physiology of the male brain and the female brain that are simply different. And then of course you account for things like animals. The fact that not only people but animals have very clear kind of gendered roles, segregation of gender, the fact that there is a distinction between man and woman throughout the vast majority, if not all, different kind of human civilizations and cultures. And then the fact, again, at least among mammals, although even many insects, reptiles and fish, there is once again this distinction between male and female, meaning that it can't be socially constructed in the sense that many of these people are saying. Again, unfortunately it does seem to be most queer people who have this opinion, because not only do we have real physical evidence of a difference, which again confirms the existence of trans people, but just across cultures and across the vast majority of species which are anywhere near similar to us, there is once again this very clear and defined distinction. But then the tricky question comes to, what is gender in that case? If gender isn't simply sex, because again, the physiological studies on the brain, which I was referring to earlier, do show that the brain scans, in terms of how masculine or how feminine the brain is, do not map completely onto someone's sex, but rather they map far closer onto how someone self-identifies. So regardless of someone's sex, how they were born, how they identify is, in the vast majority of cases, what will come up in the brain scans, which again kind of confirms the existence of trans people. But again, if it's not sex and if it's not a social construct, what is it? Which comes to what I believe, which is whether it's the traditional view, the kind of first view is that sex is gender, gender is sex. Then you have the second view, which again is unfortunately held by most people in the wider LGBT community, which is gender is a social construct which has the two categories. One simply being sex, which is your bodily characteristics, your physical characteristics, and then gender, which is again something more abstract in a sense, more arbitrary, again socially constructed, how you self-identify. Whether it's what I believe is that rather there are three stages. There is the first stage, which is again simply sex, simply the body, simply the physiology of a person. And then there's a second step, which is gender. However, that gender isn't something that's socially constructed, but rather gender is someone's psychology, whether they're psychologically male or psychologically female, as well as the physiology of their brain. And then under that, you have the third step, which is gender roles. And these gender roles are entirely socially constructed, although just because they're socially constructed doesn't mean that they're random or arbitrary. For example, many gender roles in terms of how women are seen in terms of being more empathetic, more caring, suited to certain roles, I believe will not be arbitrary, or rather based on the psychology of women, which is to say that in a sense it is something physical, it is something objective, it is something real, despite the fact that it is socially constructed. It has a basis in this more concrete thing, whether it's in men, the kind of gender role, the idea that men are stronger, men are tougher, men are more confident, that's based on both the psychology of men as well as the physiology of men in terms of their bodies, of men simply being, at least cis men, stronger, taller, bigger, more muscle density, more bone density. These ideas we have around kind of men and masculinity are socially constructed, but they have a basis, they have an origin in, again, biological fact. Now, that's one set of, well, I mean, we're talking about very broad sets that overlap, but that's one set you could put gender roles in. Whether if you have the other set, which is the arbitrary gender roles in terms of which colours are assigned to each gender, which kind of clothing, that kind of thing. Again, the things that aren't obviously kind of determined or suggested by psychology or physiology, but are just completely arbitrary and a result of, again, social factors and cultural factors, some of which are harmful and some of which are not. But with that, I don't know how to end the video. It's just, again, I kind of wanted to outline my view of the issue in terms of not necessarily gender, but there being 3 steps to the issue rather than 2, rather than it being you have your physiological traits and then you have your gender, which is socially constructed. Rather, you have physiological traits, psychological traits, which usually, in the vast majority of cases, overlap with the physiological traits, but not necessarily so. And then under that, you have gender roles, which the vast majority of which are based on the bedrock of those, again, previously mentioned psychological and physiological traits, but in some cases, for better or worse, are simply arbitrary.